a symbol of Nazis' mass killing. He was infamous for his medical experiments, and mentioning his name builds fear or hatred. Josef Mengele has been compared with the devil himself and placed on the same throne as the angel of death. He was a trained medical doctor who feasted on the lives of thousands for his pleasures. Some justified his actions, but many condemned him. Not only was he after human lives not equal to his, but he also made sure his victims were innocent and helpless people. This video is about the sadistic life of German citizen and scientist Josef Mengele. Before we dive into his biography, please hit the like and subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. His early days. Josef Mengele was born in Günzburg, Germany, to a Catholic couple, Karl and Walpurga Mengele, on March 16, 1911. His father was a local manufacturer of farming machinery. His mother was a fearsome woman in the locality who forced her demands and criticisms on not just her children, but everyone she had an encounter with, a characterization that led Joseph to state once that his mother had no capability of love, for he might have experienced her wrath as the eldest child of 3 sons. As a child, Joseph had the respect of his teachers, as he was described as a pleasant child, especially as he grew to love art, music and skiing, major activities that encouraged socialization. In the prime of his teenage years, Joseph fell victim to a bone marrow disease, osteomyelitis, which kept him off his academic radar for 6 months, and by the time he was returning to school, he was behind his peers. The fact didn't deter the teenager. In fact, the phase of Joseph's discipline and determination was revealed in the next 2 years, which birthed his success of not just catching up with his peers, but also surpassing many in grades. As opposed to his father's wish for him to join his factory as the eldest son, Joseph had other aspirations of his life and career. He wanted a career in science and anthropology, a wish which came to pass. University days. In April 1930, Joseph got accepted into the medical and philosophy faculties at Munich University. He worked at being a doctor not just in academics or his dressing style, neat and corporate, but also in his socialization. Practically, Joseph was the typical gentleman of many ladies. Munich was a good deal for him, and eventually would be the beginning of the creation of a man feared and hated by millions. When Joseph got accepted into university, Munich was the heart of a growing Nazi Socialist Party led by Adolf Hitler, and by the next year of his admission, Joseph had considered taking a bold step into politics. He joined the Steel Helmets in March 1931, a group that advocated for the same vision of the Nazis, the return of German pride and pureness, and the condemnation of racial impurities. His interest grew when many Germans proclaimed the unworthiness of some lives. Taking this hold, he began growing his influence in this ideology amongst many people and gaining respect as a scientific researcher. His ideologies and obsession with eugenics were largely influenced by his then professor, Dr. Ernest Rudin, who had a dogmatic view that doctors that the right always to terminate lives that were not worthy. Dr. Rudin was called to assist the law to protect hereditary health. By the time the Nazis took control of the German government, Rudin would establish a law for sterilizing people with gene flaws, that is, people who were disabled, a project that Joseph himself would take to the extreme in coming years. In 1933, Mengele enlisted for the Stormtroopers, or SA. 4 years later, he applied to be a member of the party and SS membership the following year. Within these years, Joseph had kidney failure, which held him back from participating fully in the ideologies, and instead focusing on his education, which earned him a PhD. And in 1937, he was appointed as a research assistant with the Third Reich Institute for Hereditary at the University of Frankfurt, where he earned the respect of his immediate supervisor, who was also one of Hitler's appraised personalities, Professor Ottmar Freyer von Verscher. By age 28, Joseph had earned himself great respect among many of his colleagues, as well as his medical, and had built considerable power. His military service heavily influenced his conception of himself. Mengele served in the Reserve Medical Corps for a year, after spending 6 months in a particularly prepared Mountain Light Infantry Battalion in 1938 and 1939. His early married life. Josef Mengele found a beautiful woman fit for his growing status and intended to marry her. Her name was Irene, but despite her graced beauty, Joseph had problems getting Irene as his wife, as the word doubts about her being a purebred, purely of Aryan ancestry. It took a long, but the romantic affair became fruitful, with Joseph and Irene getting married in 1939 and having a son. The birth of their son introduced the emergence of war in 1940. The unveiling of the self. Josef had accomplished a lot within 10 years of leaving his father's house, and while he was known for being an ideologue, he was respected for being a social and pleasant being. It is a wonder the emergence of the war pushed out the beastly side of him. He served with a Waffen SS regiment for 3 years as an assistant lieutenant, largely in the east, including fighting in Russia, where according to SS records, he sustained injuries and was deemed physically unfit for duty. He was praised for having acquitted himself admirably in the face of the adversary, and was awarded 5 decorations, including the 1st and 2nd class Iron Cross. Mengele joined the Viking division of Waffen 55's Medical Corps in January 1942, where he played hero by rescuing 2 soldiers from getting burnt. In a few months, Josef had landed the position of captain, and his dream job as a eugenic researcher. Auschwitz. In 1943, Josef Mengele was to report to Auschwitz in Poland, a concentration camp. Auschwitz was a horrifying death camp, where people, especially Jews, suffered greatly. It was Mengele's responsibility to conduct genetic experiments and studies. Instead of improving science, Mengele increased the plight of his unequal human beings. Despite being the camp's top physician, Mengele was perceived by many prisoners to have power above and beyond his station. He stood out from other doctors because he was a cold-blooded killer. The prisoners brought to this camp, which would later be called the death camp, had their lives on the fence. The non-disabled adults were taken out for slavery, and the weak and children were gassed to death. Dr. Josef could decide in a matter of seconds whether you would survive or perish right there and then. To him, these prisoners were just a specimen and not humans. While sending sick non-Germans directly to death chambers, he spared his pure Aryan ancestry, the Germans. For his experiments, Mengele is primarily renowned. He encouraged conducting medical research on prisoners, particularly twins and dwarfs. Twins enthralled him, and just between 1943 and 1944, he researched about 1,500 sets of twins, and according to records, of the 3,000 twins in his lab, only 200 survived. Mengele frequently investigated identical twins, one of his most prized research subjects. As one of them described, it was like a laboratory. There isn't a piece of the body that wasn't measured and compared. We were always sitting together, always nude. We would sit for hours together. Mengele performed different and rigorous experiments on twins, but one which stood out was dissection. He was given the authority to arrange for the twins to die together to demonstrate the impact of inheritance. He could then compare healthy or ill organs. In many cases, Mengele could act randomly and unexpectedly in his killings. A radiologist who worked in a prison hospital described a pair of gypsy twins as 2 lovely lads of 7 or 8, whom we were researching from all angles, from the 16 or 18 different specialities we represented. In those days, it was thought that the boys might have tuberculosis, because both experienced joint symptoms, although the radiologist and other convict doctors did not find any evidence of tuberculosis. Mengele was persuaded that the youngsters had the illness. Mengele was furious and told the radiologist to stay in the room before leaving with the twins. After approximately an hour, Mengele returned with a calm, "You are right. There wasn't anything. Yes, I dissected them." Apparently, Mengele had shot the boys in the neck and examined their inner body parts, even while their blood was still quite warm. He was known to end arguments by killing twins, and he often sent those who weren't tall enough to meet 5 feet standards to be gassed. Rather than being tagged an extremist, his Nazi supervisors hailed him for being meticulous in his duty. Mengele was rather enthusiastic about his mission. His nature was beyond that of a scientist or even an ideological zealot. He was more a sadist, who enjoyed inflicting pain on others and watching them lose their existence. His mother might have planted a seed in him while he was younger, which manifested in the Nazis' ideology of humanity and the war. Mengele's feast on human life was cut short by the war's end and the Russians' victory. He did what he knew was his only surviving tactic. He ran. The run and his death. Even knowing that the war was lost, Josef Mengele worked on his research and experiment until the last minute, when he figured he had to leave. He secretly sent out his research papers when they became useless, and they never got to his professor von Verscher, who he'd sent them as the research was accidentally misplaced. Josef suddenly disappeared from Auschwitz, with no one knowing his destination. He knew quite clearly that the Russians would want his head. He became a fugitive who worked as a farmer for the first few years in Bavaria, after which he moved to South America. He married his late brother's wife after his wife had divorced him in absentia. He later moved to Brazil, where he made acquaintance with an ex-Nazi party member, Wolfgang Gerhard. Yet even still on the run, and years after the war, he still treated people around him as racial and intellectual inferiors. He was rather reincarnating his mother's character of hatred and wickedness. In 1985, a multinational forensics team traveled to Brazil in search for Mengele. They found that a man named Wolfgang had died of a stroke while swimming, and it was later realized that the man's identity was truly Josef Mengele. If you like this biography, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to be amongst the first to know when we release a new video. Here are more videos for you to watch. See you in one of the next videos.